Hello, this is Grandma from Devon. This week we are going to be talking about the death of Lazarus, and next week we will be looking at the resurrection of Lazarus. This story is to be found in John 11, 1-45. Do read it for yourselves. In this well-known story, we are going to look at three key people and see how they individually responded to the death of someone they loved. First, we will be looking at Martha, and perhaps we shall see her in a new light. Our opinion of her is always coloured by the story of Mary and Martha, which we read about in Luke 10:38-42. She doesn't really show up in a very good light in that particular passage. Then we will be looking at Mary and see how she responded to the death of her brother. From what we learn of her in Luke 10 and also John 12, her response is pretty predictable. She was a lady who loved deeply and devotedly, and her sorrow and grief at the loss of Lazarus was plainly evident. And finally, we will be looking at Jesus, the central figure in this story, and see how he responds to the death of his friend. And during this passage, we see him making one of the most startling and powerful statements he ever made. You can see that in verses 25 and 26. And next week, we will examine its implications for us. So let's look at Martha. What is your opinion of Martha? Do you see her as the woman who was too busy with the practicalities of hospitality to want to spend quality time with Jesus? Do you see her as a workaholic, a perfectionist, someone easily distracted by the cares of this world? Was she someone who needed others to notice how busy she was, how indispensable and valuable she was, how necessary she was to the proper running of things? Bless her, what a servant heart she had. We see her again in chapter 12, verse 2 of John's Gospel, still running around serving at a dinner that was being given in honour of Jesus. Lazarus and Mary were there, but Martha was again busy serving. Yet just when we might be classifying her as a worldly sort of person, more interested in practical matters than spiritual matters, we see her making two tremendous statements of faith to Jesus when she meets him at Bethany in the passage that we're looking at today. I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask, verse 22, she says, and I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world, and that's verse 27. What faith this woman had in Jesus! What a contrast to the Jews in chapter 10, verse 24. How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Martha didn't need to be told. She knew with the heart of faith who Jesus really was. She demonstrated her faith to Jesus when she said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. She actually had the faith to believe that Jesus could work a miracle there and then. He had already raised at least two people from the dead, Jairus' daughter and the son of the widow at Nain. And I believe that she knew that Jesus could do anything he chose to do. But notice how she left the outcome to him. She didn't dictate to him what she wanted him to do. She trusted him implicitly that he would do the right thing. At the end of the story, we see the practical side of Martha's nature coming out again. When Jesus arrived at the tomb of Lazarus, he wanted the stone that was laid across the entrance taken away. Martha's sensible nature came to the fore. But Lord, by this time there is a bad odour, for he has been there 4 days. I do love the other versions of this delicate phrase, there is a bad odour. They are very much more down to earth. There is a stench, and he stinketh in the authorised version. This is the Middle East, and corpses smell very bad after 4 days. What a lovely mixture of practicality and spirituality Martha was. We don't have to make a distinction between the two. It's possible to be a very capable and organised sort of person who gets things done, and at the same time have a solid, God-inspired faith that enables you to believe God and His Word without a shadow of doubt. These characteristics are not mutually exclusive. Now, what about Mary? She was the dreamer, the listener, the worshipper, the adorer. We can see her in chapter 12 as the extravagant giver who wants to show her love and devotion to Jesus. She pours a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, over the feet of Jesus. This would have been worth a year's wages. Just imagine, ladies, a pint of perfume, not just a few drops or a smear from a roll-on. All she ever wanted to do was to spend precious time at the feet of Jesus, listening and loving. No wonder she was so distraught at the death of her brother. I'm sure that she loved him too, devotedly and extravagantly. I can imagine her as the gentle, sensitive type who wept easily and freely when she was sad. Unlike her strong sister, she probably fell to pieces when Lazarus died. I imagine that she was probably the kind of person who really couldn't cope under the immense pain of loss and grief. I'm sure that she had poured out her love extravagantly over her brother, and his loss was more than she could bear. 4 days after his burial, we see her still mourning and grieving in her house, with many friends there to comfort her. When she eventually goes to meet Jesus, she's still weeping, and those friends with her are weeping too. When she reached Jesus, she fell at his feet and poured out her heart's anguish. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even in her grief and sorrow, her faith in Jesus shines through. And Jesus, so moved at seeing the depth of her pain, weeps with her. I don't believe that Jesus was weeping for Lazarus at that time, as the Jews suggested. I'm sure that if he wept for Lazarus, he would have done it when he knew that his friend had died. No, I believe he was doing something for Mary that he still does for us today. He was weeping with her, in empathy with her feelings, moved to tears by her pain and grief, identifying with her sorrow. Can you believe that Jesus could be moved to tears by your pain and grief? Can you imagine him holding on to you to love and comfort you, and feeling so deeply with you and for you that he cries with you? He is not unmoved by your human emotions. He has been there himself. He knows what it is like to suffer pain and loss of every kind. Listen to what the book of Hebrews says. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And that's Hebrews 4:14-16. Jesus is able to sympathize with our weaknesses and understands our frailty. He will always be there for us in our time of need. Just as Martha and Mary learnt to do, we need to learn to trust him with all our problems and needs, and know that he will always have a solution which will be the very best for each one of us individually. That is how he demonstrates his love for us today, through his constant care and compassion for us. So let's now look at Jesus, the central figure in this wonderful story. At the beginning of, at the beginning of this chapter, we see Jesus doing something that on the surface looks rather callous. He did not respond immediately to Mary and Martha's call for help, but stayed where he was for another 2 days. Why didn't he move immediately and swiftly when he received their message? I believe it was because he knew what his Father wanted him to do, and he was more concerned in only doing what he saw his Father doing, as it says in John 5:19, than in rushing into meeting the obvious and visible needs. Jesus was always totally obedient to the Father's will, and only ever did what pleased him. John 8:29. He was never forced into precipitous action by the urgency of the circumstances. Sometimes we batter at God's door, pleading the absolute urgency of our situation and want God to jump into action right then and there. But God has his perfect timing for responding to our requests and is never hurried or harried into leaping into action ahead of his precise and exact right timing. Jesus knew, with God's supernatural gift of knowledge, exactly what his Father wanted him to do in this situation, and he was not pressured by the visible circumstances into moving ahead of his Father's timing and will. What an amazing peace must have emanated from this extraordinary man who was God, because he had the deepest knowledge of the Father's heart and was never moved away from God's purposes, never panicked into precipitous action. To Jesus, the physical death of Lazarus was no more than a falling asleep, and he used that term to his disciples. Paul used that very same expression when talking about physical death in Corinthians and Thessalonians. But when Jesus used it of Lazarus, his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. Just like the woman at the well, when Jesus uses natural terms to express spiritual truths, we sometimes don't understand the spiritual implications of what he is saying. The disciples needed Jesus to spell it out for them. Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. Remember that this was knowledge that Jesus was sharing with them before they had officially been told, but he wanted them to know that his greatest concern was for their faith, so that you may believe. Jesus is always wanting to encourage our faith and help us overcome our unbelief. He knows that faith in God can work miracles, which in itself stimulates more faith. Jesus could see clearly the wider picture, the spiritual implications of this situation. He knew that God wanted to do an amazing miracle, one that would lead many people to believe in him. A resurrection is far more awe-inspiring than a healing. You simply cannot explain away someone being raised from the dead, especially when they've been in the tomb for 4 days. What was Jesus' motive in all this delay? It was so that the glory of God might be revealed, as it says in verse 40. He said to his disciples, "It is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." John 11:4. Jesus wanted to give honour and glory to his Father, and everything he did was for that one motive. The more you see what Jesus did in the Gospels, the more you want to praise and worship him and give all the honour and glory to his name. Are we similarly motivated? Do we want to see the Father glorified? Is all that we say and do done with a desire to bring glory to Jesus and only to Jesus? Do we long to see his name honoured and lifted up in our midst in our hometown? Wouldn't we love to see the name of Jesus respected, revered, worshipped and adored, rather than used as a casual swear word? God wants to reveal his glory to us, to strengthen our faith and belief in him, because he knows how important it is to us that we are built up in our faith. John said in his epistle, "This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Who is he that overcomes the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God." And that's 1 John 5:4 and 5. Jesus wants to encourage our faith and belief in him so that we can live in the victory that he achieved for us on the cross. This week we have seen how the death of Lazarus affected his sisters and his friend Jesus. Next week we shall see how the resurrection to life of Lazarus can affect us today. Let us listen to some more of Fiona's beautiful music.